August 12, 2000. The Barents Sea. A depth of 107 meters. On the bottom lies the nuclear submarine cruiser Kursk. 154 meters of steel. 2 nuclear reactors. 24 cruise missiles. The bow of the boat is destroyed. The first compartment has almost completely disappeared. At the epicenter of the explosion, the temperature reached 2,000 degrees. Metal was melting, but in the 9th compartment, in the stern, there were still survivors. 23 men. They heard ships above them. They banged on the hull. They waited, and they wrote notes. One such note was found only 2 months later. It lay in the pocket of Captain-Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov. A few lines. The text was written in the dark. The handwriting trembled. The flashlight was almost dead, and it was precisely this note that shattered the convenient version of everyone dying instantly. Officially, everything was explained simply. An explosion of a training torpedo. A hydrogen peroxide leak. Detonation. After that, supposedly almost no one could have survived. But then a direct question arises. Where did the note with the exact time come from? Where did the knocking come from? The knocking that was recorded for 2 days. And why did Norwegian rescuers later say that the hatch could have been opened in a matter of hours if they were only allowed access many days later? August 2000. The Northern Fleet is conducting its largest exercises in recent years. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fleet was going through a severe crisis. There was not enough money. The ships were aging. Training was declining. Against this background, Kursk was a symbol of strength, a heavy nuclear-powered missile cruiser of the Ante project. Oscar II by NATO classification. An enormous boat, almost like a 10-story building laid on its side. The crew was young. The average age was about 26. At home, many were awaited by wives and small children. The boat was commanded by Captain First Rank Gennady Lyachin, an experienced submariner. He had 8 autonomous deployments behind him. In the fleet, he was seriously respected. On the morning of August 12th, the boat was tasked with carrying out a training torpedo attack on a surface target. Everything was going according to plan. At 11:28, the hydroacousticians of the cruiser Piotr Veliki recorded the first underwater explosion. Roughly 100 kilograms in TNT equivalent. 2 minutes and 15 seconds later, the second thundered. Much more powerful. It was registered even by seismic stations in Norway. After that, Kursk fell silent, and this is where the chain of oddities begins. The exercises were not stopped immediately. The loss of contact with the nuclear submarine did not trigger an immediate rescue operation. Later, the command explained this by saying that the boat might simply have gone to the seabed as part of the maneuver plan. But this was not a diesel submarine near the coast. A nuclear cruiser with a full crew and armament had gone silent. The first active search began only in the evening. That is, about 8 hours after the explosions. This is a key figure. In 8 hours, a full-scale operation could have been deployed. If there were survivors in the stern compartments, that time cost them their chance. The boat was discovered early on the morning of August 13th. It lay at a depth of 107 meters, listing to starboard. The bow had sunk into the silt. After that, the hydroacousticians of the surface ships began to hear knocking. Not chaotic, rhythmic. On the hull, a signal resembling the international distress signal. And if details like these matter to you, here we examine not myths, but chronology, documents, and real testimony. The verification took far too long. Instead of an immediate rescue assault, those above first tried to determine the source of the sound. 2 days were spent confirming that the knocking was coming from the 9th compartment. That means people could have been sending signals, while on the surface, they were still arguing over whether it was a mistake. On August 14th, rescue vehicles arrived at the site. They were supposed to dock with the emergency hatch, but the attempts failed one after another. Officially, the storm, the current, and damage to the hatch platform got in the way. Unofficially, the problem ran deeper. The equipment was outdated. It was poorly maintained. The crew's training proved insufficient. The story of foreign assistance looks even worse. As early as the second day, Norway offered to send a rescue vessel with specialists and deep-sea equipment. Then Britain offered help. Then the United States of America. Each time the answer was the same. We'll manage on our own. Only they did not manage on their own. When the Norwegians were finally allowed to the boat on August 21st, it took them about 6 hours to open the hatch. But by that point, 9 days had already passed. Now the main thing. Kolesnikov's note was dated 3:15 p.m. on August 12th. That is, several hours after the explosions. It said that there were 23 men in the 8th and 9th compartments. It also said that there was no lighting, that their condition was grave, and that the regeneration supply would run out in 7 or 8 hours. This means only one thing. The men were alive long after the disaster. They were assessing the situation. They were waiting for help. And they fought to the end. The note was found only on October 25th, when the bodies were being recovered. Later, only part of the text was published. The full note was never shown. Reports emerged that there were more lines than officials disclosed. Moreover, there was talk of other notes found in the compartment. And this is no longer just a detail. It is a direct trace of living witnesses inside the sunken submarine. A week after the high-profile interview, everything started to reverse. The diver who had taken part in recovering the bodies suddenly turned out to have supposedly been misunderstood. No notes, officials said, had been found. The journalists had distorted everything. And then this man resigned from the Navy and left for the mainland. After that, they were no longer able to find him for another conversation. But the story did not end there. In August 2001, a fragment of yet another note reached the press. Its author was identified as Captain-Lieutenant Rashid Taryapov. The text was short and terrifying. "Everyone is up top. We will try to get out. There is little time." These words matter. They mean that the surviving sailors had gathered in the 9th compartment. That was the highest point in the stern section, which means the men were still fighting. They were counting on getting out through the escape hatch, or through the torpedo tubes. Why did this not happen? Officially, they spoke of excessively high pressure in the compartment. With sudden decompression, there was almost no chance. But there was another version as well. An attempt was made after all, and something or someone prevented them. By the way, if details like these interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine not only the facts, but also what usually remains behind the scenes. Now to the cause of the explosions. After 3 years of work, the official investigation named the source a 6576A training torpedo. In the Navy it was called KIT. It used highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide and kerosene, an extremely dangerous mixture. According to the prosecutor's version, there was a peroxide leak. A chemical reaction began, and 2 minutes later, the warhead detonated. The explosion was monstrous, about 650 kilograms of explosive. The submarine's forward compartments were destroyed almost instantly. At first glance, everything looks logical. But there is one detail that is hard to ignore. Such torpedoes had been in service since 1976, almost a quarter of a century. And during that time, not a single similar case of detonation due to a leak had occurred. Moreover, specialists who studied the damage spoke of signs of an external impact. A dent was noticed on the torpedo tube casing, the kind that looked as if it had been struck from the outside, and the impact had happened before the explosion. From this grew the second version, a collision. On August 12th, not only Russian ships were in the exercise area, there were also 2 American nuclear submarines there, Memphis and Toledo. They were monitoring the maneuvers. This was standard practice from the Cold War era. After the disaster, Memphis urgently left for a Norwegian port. Later, the submarine was seen in dry dock with damage to the bow section. The American side denied everything. The official explanation sounded almost mocking. The damage had supposedly been sustained during a failed mooring. Then things became even stranger. In 2002, French director Jean-Michel Carré released a documentary film about the sinking of the Kursk. In one version of the film, a former intelligence officer of the Northern Fleet claimed that a message had come from the submarine a few hours before the disaster. The commander reported the presence of a foreign submarine and an evasive maneuver. According to him, the entry was in the radio communications log, but the log itself disappeared after a nighttime fire on the Stabsship in September 2000. It was precisely the rooms where official materials were stored that burned. The interim conclusion looked grim. The submarine on the bottom. 118 dead. Notes that are still disputed to this day. Knocking sounds that according to witnesses were heard but not used as a chance for rescue. Foreign assistance that was accepted too late. A damaged American submarine. Disappeared documents. And not a single answer that would remove all questions. And then another lead surfaced. In 2012, journalists were given a copy of the inspection report for the 9th compartment. Among the sailors' personal belongings, It allegedly listed a strange object, a metal cylinder about 40 centimeters long, with unknown symbols on its surface. It was seized for examination. Later, all inquiries received the same answer. The document was not found. The item was not listed in the inventory. And here the diver appears again. One of those who first entered the 9th compartment after the submarine was raised. He kept silent for a long time, citing a prohibition, but he still uttered one phrase. There was something there that should not have been there. When the brass saw it, they pulled us all out. Then another group went down. Not ours, and we were ordered to forget. But first it is important to fix the main point. Up to this moment, the story still remained within the framework of a version about a catastrophe, a mistake, a chain of fatal decisions. Now the frame is cracking. Too many details do not fit the usual picture. An object was found on the submarine that seemingly did not exist. It was immediately seized. The people who saw the find were forced to remain silent. The wording sounded harsh and almost absurd. This object does not exist. You did not find it. You did not see it. And this does not look like routine secrecy. This is not how they hide just evidence. This is how they hide the very fact of reality. Then the account of a Norwegian participant in the rescue operation surfaces. They were allowed only to the stern, only to the 9th compartment. They were forbidden even to inspect the bow section. The official explanation was radiation, but the instruments showed normal background levels. There was no leak, and this is already the first serious break in the official version. And then the most terrifying part. In the 9th compartment, the sailors' bodies were found by the bulkhead. They were trying to get into the 8th compartment, or on the contrary, to seal themselves off from it. And the door between the compartments was not simply closed. It had been welded shut from the inside. That is a decision on the edge of despair. Welding takes time. It takes oxygen. Which means the men consciously cut off their own path to rescue. They feared something more than suffocation. If you are interested in analyses like this, subscribe to the channel. Here we do not retell legends, but assemble a chain from documents, testimony, and strange coincidences. Then an audio recording appears. At first it looks like another internet hoax. Poor sound. Anonymous publication. A Norwegian forum. But the content is too specific. First, the ordinary actions of submariners. Shut off the ventilation. Count the men. Divide the regeneration cartridges. Assess the wounded. Everything sounds terrifying, but logical. The men are fighting for their lives by the book. And then a phrase is heard on the recording after which everything changes. There is someone in the empty 8th compartment. Scraping can be heard. Knocking. Not the rhythm their own men would have tapped out. And this is especially horrifying for one reason. The 8th compartment, according to the sailors themselves, is already empty. No one is left there. Then a blow against metal. And in order to weld the bulkhead, not to dog it shut, not to hold it closed by hand, to weld it. That is the key detail. It is repeated in the Norwegian's account, in the audio file, and later in the words of an investigator from the military prosecutor's office. When different sources not directly connected converge on the same strange point, it no longer looks like coincidence. A former investigator who worked on the case claimed that he had heard the full version of the recording, not 7 minutes, 34. According to him, at first the sailors waited for help and held on, then they began to hear footsteps in the flooded compartment, then voices, and the most frightening thing, if this account is to be believed, is that the voices belonged to those who had already died in the explosion. They called them by name and asked to be let in. The official explanation is convenient. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, hallucinations in dying men. Such a version is indeed possible for human perception. But it has a weak point. A tape recorder does not experience hypoxia. If there is sound on the tape, then there were real vibrations of air or metal in that space, which means the source existed physically. And here that same cylinder appears again. According to the investigator, it was found next to Kolesnikov's body. The examination allegedly showed impossible things. An unknown alloy, unidentified symbols, and the age of the organic traces on the surface was about 47,000 years. Even if half of these claims are dismissed as exaggeration, the main thing remains. The object stood out from everything familiar so much that it was hidden immediately. Then the picture becomes even more disturbing. After the submarine sank, anomalous low-frequency signals were recorded in the disaster area. More than 400 cases over 10 years. Not ships, not submarines, not seismic activity, not whales. Repeating structures were noticed in the signals. In other words, it was not chaos. It resembled a system. Now remember one more detail. The full text of Kolesnikov's note, if the leak is to be believed, contained lines that no one officially saw. It spoke of movement in the 8th compartment, of something knocking and wanting to get in, and of the most terrifying phrase in this whole story. We woke it up. Just 2 words, but they are what link the cylinder, the sounds, the welded door, and the subsequent secrecy into one chain. There is another important layer as well. After the tragedy, almost everyone who came too close to this subject fell silent. One retracted his words, another disappeared from view, a third died, a fourth was shut down professionally. Taken separately, this can be written off as coincidence. But when there are many such episodes, coincidence begins to look like a cover-up. And finally, the bow section of the submarine, it was cut off while still on the bottom, officially to make the raising easier. That is a rational explanation. But according to unofficial versions, that was exactly where what could not be shown to anyone might have been located. Not to the Norwegians, not to the Americans, not even to most of their own people. If this is true, then the entire rescue and recovery operation was not only technical, that is why the next part is so important. It is no longer only about the sinking of a submarine. It is about what exactly was heard above when they received the second recording. Not the one where people are speaking, but the one where, as the investigator claimed, a reply was heard. And if even part of what he said is true, then the question now stands differently. Not what happened to the Kursk, but what exactly woke up on the bottom of the Barents Sea. Everything discussed can be checked. Coordinates, names of ships, observation logs, reports of acoustic anomalies. These traces exist, and what cannot be checked is hidden under classification stamps, and that too says a great deal. The loss of the nuclear submarine Kursk claimed 118 lives, but perhaps along with the crew, another secret went to the bottom, the one they had no intention of bringing to the surface. This is about the second recording, the very one that was destroyed, the recording after which, according to sources, one high-ranking officer could not bear it and took his own life. I searched for traces of it for 4 years. There were dead ends. There were refusals. There were people who agreed to talk and then vanished from contact. And yet half a year ago I managed to find not the recording itself, apparently no copy of it remained, but the listening protocol. 7 pages of typewritten text. Top secret. Marked keep forever. That wording alone already sounds terrifying. The document is dated November 15, 2000. The listening location is listed as Facility Zarya 7. It is a closed complex near Murmansk. Formally, it does not exist. 7 people were in the room. 3 admirals, 2 representatives of the Federal Security Service, a military acoustician, and a priest, the archpriest of the Northern Fleet. His very presence breaks the logic of a secret technical meeting. Priests are not invited to an ordinary review of hydroacoustic noise. The recording lasted 8 minutes and 43 seconds. The first 2 minutes are almost empty. Water noise, background crackling, the usual underwater hum. And then a sound appears that the protocol describes as low frequency, modulated with traces of artificial structure. This is an important detail, not a natural noise, not a random vibration, a structure resembling a signal. The expert tried to compare what he heard to something familiar. According to him, it resembled slowed human speech passed through a metallic resonator. Some fragments sounded like words, but no known language could be identified. 8 minutes of an alien, crushing sound. And then the last 30 seconds, which, judging by the protocol, frightened even trained people. At the mark of 8 minutes and 13 seconds, the character of the signal changed sharply. The frequency rose into the audible range. A clear melodic pattern emerged. Not music in the usual sense, rather a set of tones assembled into a strict repeating pattern. And here is the main thing. This pattern repeated 3 times. Each time absolutely identically, accurate to 1,000th of a second. For a living source, such stability is almost impossible. For a machine it is possible. And then there was a note in pencil in the document. Uneven handwriting. A short phrase stating that during the 3rd repetition, everyone present experienced a synchronized reaction, dizziness, stupor, a wave of inexplicable terror. 1 rear admiral lost consciousness. A captain first rank ran out of the room. 14 minutes later, He was found dead in the restroom. A gunshot wound to the head. Service weapon. If this is true, then we are not dealing with just a strange recording. This is an effect that breaks the psyche almost instantly. I showed the text to 3 independent specialists. An acoustician from Moscow State University, a neurophysiologist from the Brain Institute, and a military psychologist who worked with submariners. Their conclusions agreed on the main point. Infrasound at certain frequencies really can cause panic, nausea, disorientation. Such effects have long been studied. Moreover, acoustic weapons have repeatedly been discussed in military programs in different countries. By the way, if details like these interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine not myths, but the logic of documents, testimony, and hidden connections. But there is a problem. To create such powerful artificial infrasound, you do not need a small device. You need an entire complex of equipment, generators, amplifiers, emitters. According to specialist estimates, we may be talking about a system the size of a truck or even larger. On the floor of the Barents Sea in the area of old Soviet research, nothing like that officially existed, which leaves 2 possibilities. Either the equipment appeared later, or the source was not technology in the usual sense at all. The neurophysiologist added one more thought. If a copy of the sound played through equipment caused such a reaction in people on land, then the original inside a submarine could have acted incomparably, more strongly. In an enclosed metal hull, under stress, in complete isolation. That is no longer just fear. It is neurophysiological shock. The brain receives a signal of extreme threat before a person even has time to understand anything. And then the fate of the people in the 9th compartment looks different. 23 people. Darkness. Waiting. No possibility of escape. If they really heard such a signal for hours, it could have turned their final hours into a real hell. Not only physical but mental. Not just suffocation and cold, but the destruction of consciousness under the pressure of a sound that could not be switched off. But that is not all. The second part of the story is connected with that very cylinder, with an alloy that does not exist in known catalogs, with an age of about 47,000 years, and with symbols that did not match any known writing system. Later, a photograph of these signs surfaced on an anonymous cryptography enthusiast's platform in 2009. At first it was taken for a fake. That always happens. When a find is too strange, the first explanation is the most convenient one. A few months later, a participant from Germany appeared. He wrote that he had seen similar signs on a tablet from Ur. This is an ancient Sumerian city in Mesopotamia, in the territory of modern Iraq. Sumerian civilization is considered one of the oldest on Earth. It was there that early forms of writing, urban administration, and temple culture emerged. But the dating of Sumerian tablets goes back roughly to the 4th millennium BCE. And here the object was being assigned an age of tens of thousands of years. The gap is colossal. And here a crazy but coherent version arises. What if the Sumerians did not invent some of their symbols, but inherited them? Did not create them from scratch, but preserved the memory of something far more ancient? In Sumerian texts, there is the word Abzu. It is usually translated as the abyss or underground waters. But in a religious context, it is also a primordial, prehistoric, deep world associated with secret knowledge. Similar images are found not only among the Sumerians. In Norse tradition, there is the world serpent lying in the depths. Among the Greeks, the Titans are imprisoned beneath the earth. In Japanese tradition, a gigantic creature underground causes disasters with its movements. The northern peoples of the Russian north also had stories about places in the sea where it was better not to go. Nets tear there. The compass behaves strangely there. People hear incomprehensible sounds there. For coastal inhabitants, these were not children's tales, but practical prohibitions shaped by experience. One such place, according to the interlocutors, coincides with the area where the Kursk was lost. And if you gather all the versions into one chain, the picture becomes disturbing. A very long time ago, an object of unknown origin ended up on the seabed. Near it, or inside it, there was a source of the signal. For thousands of years it remained silent. People avoided that zone. And then modern military technology came into that area. Nuclear submarines, reactors, torpedoes, powerful hydroacoustic impulses. What happened on August 12, 2000 we do not know. But it can be assumed that the submarine got too close, touched something, activated something. In this version, the first explosion was not the cause of the catastrophe in the usual sense, but a reaction to contact. And the second explosion was already the detonation of the ammunition and the consequence of a chain accident. This is only a hypothesis, but it explains why some details of the official version remained inconsistencies. Why was this not stated openly? Because such an admission would destroy too much. Imagine the public reaction if the authorities announced that a nuclear submarine had encountered not just an accident, possibly an object that fits neither history nor science. It would cause more than a scandal. It would cause panic. And yet silence does not solve the problem. After the Kursk was raised, anomalous signals continued to be recorded in that area. According to available data, their number was growing. Part of the statistics for recent years is completely classified, but even fragmentary information shows an alarming trend, not a decline, not a fading away. On the contrary, an intensification of activity, and in 2021, the Norwegian trawler Northern Star disappeared nearby. Wreckage was found, life jackets, and the body of one of the crew members without severe external injuries. According to unofficial data, the autopsy showed signs of a powerful acoustic impact. And here it is important to pause. Even if we discard the boldest conclusions, one fact remains. There is too much classified data in the story of Kursk, too many strange coincidences, and too many people who were afraid to speak, which means the question is not closed. It is simply hidden. And amid all the versions, we must not forget the main thing. 118 people. 118 lives. This is not an abstract tragedy. These are real sailors who fought to the very end in the compartments of a sinking submarine. Dmitry Kolesnikov, who left a note in the darkness. Gennady Lyachin, the ship's commander. Young officers and sailors who knocked on the hull, waited for help and did not give up. Whatever the true cause of their deaths was, it does not make their courage any less. On the contrary, if this story teaches us anything, it is this. The truth does not disappear because it is forbidden. It slips into the shadows, but it continues to weigh on memory, on documents, on accidental slips of the tongue, on strange figures in classified reports. And as long as we keep asking questions, as long as we compare the facts, as long as we remember the names of the dead, completely, if there is a new investigation, we will definitely return to it. But for now, the final point has been made. The story is not over, but this conversation is finished. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you again soon.